First of all,
this is the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
It might be cool, I don't know. And if it's not, I don't care.
The BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Bill Simmons works for ESPN. He's also named the Sports Guy, and he writes a comical sports column. He must be a popular dude.
The BS Report.
It's got a real dirty sound, like a rusty steak knife cutting through a well-aged steak.
Now.
Here's Bill Simmons.
What's happening? I want to get right to this week's guest. He's the creator and lead analyst for FootballOutsiders.com, as well as the editor of an informative book called Pro Football Prospectus, a book that any self-respecting NFL fan needs to purchase. Aaron Schatz, welcome to the show.
Hey, man. Thanks for having me on.
All right. We just settled before you came on the Schatz thing.
Yes, I know. As I point out, it's easier in the original Hebrew where it's only two letters.
It's like J.J. Putz versus Putz.
Yeah, well, at least I don't have that thing. You know, what do you call it? The Reggie Cleveland All-Stars?
The Reggie Cleveland All-Stars, yeah. Exactly. All right, so you and I have been like natural enemies in the wild for years. You believe that the NFL can be broken down statistically, and I believe that it was the one sport that defied statistics. But I ripped through your 2007 prospectus, which just came out a couple weeks ago, on a cross-country flight this week going to New York City and back. I have to say, you're winning me over.
Hey, I appreciate it. I wouldn't say we're natural enemies, man. I mean, we're both Patriots fans. That's got to count for something.
Yeah, but you're a Peyton Manning defender, and we're gonna get to that. We're gonna get to that later in the show. But the key statistic you guys created is called DVOA, which, hey, first of all, that's a terrible acronym because you can't say it.
I know. I'm sort of stuck with it after 4 years, though.
Can't you just switch the O and the V and make it Dova?
I don't know. It was meant to be kind of a South Park joke.
DVOA?
Yeah, for what's their band called? DVDA?
Oh, yeah, okay. Well, it's a extremely difficult stat to understand, but it's very valuable. So I wanted to see if you could explain it in 45 seconds or less, and I'm going to time you.
We take every single play during the season. We judge it based on how many yards it gets towards the first down, what the down and distance are, as well as how close it gets you to the end zone. We compare it to all plays of the same type. We adjust it based on the opponent. And if it's higher than 0, that's good for offense and bad for defense. If it's lower than 0, that's good for defense and bad for offense.
So let's say the Colts has like a plus 17.5, that's good.
Yes.
If the Raiders would have a minus 17.5 offensively, that's bad.
Yes, and we're stuck with this situation where defense is the opposite of offense, and, you know, people have suggested that we undo that, but then it doesn't make, certain other things don't make logical sense, but, you know, when we add it all up to be total, we reverse defense, so that the total, you know, the highest total is the best total.
So a defense like the Ravens last year frequently was like a minus 30 for the DVOA.
Right. Yeah, I think they were like minus 25 for the year. They were the number 1 or number 2 defense. I can't remember which.
And then you look at this was a classic. San Fran at Kansas City in week 4, they lose 41-0. Offensively, a minus 133.2. Oh, no, I'm sorry. They were total minus 133.2. Offensively, minus 72.6. And defensively, plus 39.6. That's about as bad as you can get.
Yeah. And
you cannot do worse.
If you watched that game.
Yeah. So is it fair to say that you've figured out a way to fairly evaluate what happened and what's happening as it's happening, but not necessarily what's going to happen next, whether it's the next season, the next 5 weeks, or whatever?
Yeah, I think it's a better way to judge the past. Certainly, taking schedule into account is huge in the NFL.
Yeah.
And taking the down and distance to account, I mean, all those, 5-yard scrambles on 3rd and 12 that count for somebody's total yards, we take that out unless it gets you closer to a closer field goal. There's a little adjustment for that. So it does a better job of judging the past, and it also does a better job of predicting the future. It's a better predictor of wins the following year than wins, last year or points last year. It, stays more consistent from year to year. We try to filter out things which are more luck based, like, for example, field goals against you. I mean, the Eagles really couldn't do anything to stop Matt Bryant from hitting a 62-yard field goal last year.
Right.
But that doesn't normally happen, and you can't really blame them for that. And then the other thing is the advantage of it being a play-by-play breakdown. I've said I don't know about Sagarin and all the other, complicated statistical ratings that are out there. I wouldn't be surprised if there are some power ratings, total power rating systems out there that are more accurate than DVOA. But they don't have the advantage that DVOA has, which is that it can be broken down play by play. So you can use it to analyze each team's specific strengths and weaknesses. Are they good or bad in the red zone? Are they good and bad on different downs? You can break it down into players. You can break it down into, are they good when they're ahead or behind? And by doing that, you can not only, analyze a specific game matchup like we do during the playoffs, but you can also see certain trends that carry over from year to year that we use to predict whether teams are going to be improving or declining from season to season.
And one of the things that somehow you've incorporated this, I couldn't figure out exactly how, but it seems like you have, but like end of the first half, teams on their own 35-yard line, 7 seconds left, they do the draw play to Leon Washington, he runs for 25 yards, gets tackled, the half ends. You factor that in, you don't give him that much credit for the 25 yards, right? Yeah,
there's adjustments for the time in the game, and for example, I go through manually and I mark Hail Mary interceptions.
Yep.
And a Hail Mary interception does not get the interception penalty. It's only, counts as a standard incomplete pass because I don't want to blame, Peyton Manning if he launches the ball down the field 60 yards at the end of the first half and it happens to land in the hands of some other guy because, everybody's just chucking the ball down the field at that point.
Yeah, and another one that you pointed out in the book was about the 2-point conversions which I didn't even realize till you wrote this, was that teams get credit for a failed 2-point conversion if the holder fumbles the snap and then they try to throw it and it never works. And for some reason that factored into the percentages.
Yeah, it's sort of ridiculous. We take that out. I take out aborted extra points.
Yep.
Unless they were clearly fakes. I mean, I go back to this game recap if I didn't happen to watch that specific game and I figure out whether it was a fake or not. We take out the kneel downs. We take down the spike. I really wish they would stop counting spikes as incomplete passes and kneel downs as runs. I mean, Rex Grossman last year had like 26 runs for minus 10 yards or something. 23 of those were kneel downs. It's a little absurd.
That's ridiculous. See, like baseball took forever for them to do the catcher's indifference for the cheap stolen base. And like Ricky Henderson would get all these stolen bases where they were down like 10-2 and they weren't even holding them on. And football has not caught up with that for some reason.
Well, Rex Grossman, there's this story kind of coming out of Chicago camp. Rex Grossman's going to scramble more this year. So Will Carroll, who we both know, emailed me and he said, is this true? How much did Rex Grossman run in the past? And I went and looked it up.
Yeah.
And he had 3 runs that we did not change to kneel last year. And I wrote the answer is never. The guy never ran in the past. If he were to run twice as much this year, it would be completely meaningless because all of those runs were really kneel downs.
So now what, is everything on one computer? What happens if your computer crashes? How do you keep track of this? You back it up.
Dude, I do backups regularly, yeah, but people are always saying to me, that we should design really complicated database systems, and the funny thing is it's all in Excel because that happens to be what I'm comfortable with and what I was using when I started screwing around with this stuff in December of 2002.
Right. And when you went to college at Brown.
Yes.
And you graduated as an economics major, right? So how does this all factor into that?
Well, I really was not an economics major. I really was a radio major. I mean, you didn't have a major in radio, but those of us who worked at the radio station, which is WBRU, we were so devoted to it. People in Providence know it's a professional station that happens to be run by college students.
I know it. I used to get it in Boston. That was a great station because they used to play alternative in the 90s and stuff. It was one of my favorites.
You probably listened to me DJing because I was did news and sports for a little bit, and then I was a DJ. I actually did the morning show for a few months against a guy named Nick Carter, who people know because he eventually went on to WBCN.
Right.
And I went into the radio business actually out of college, not anything having to do with economics. I was a music director at an alternative station in Daytona Beach, Florida, of all things. My joke is I'm probably the only sports statistical analyst who has hosted a spring break wet T-shirt contest. And then I didn't want to go piddling around the South, so I ended up screwing around. I did market research. I wrote this column for Lycos for a while where I was sort of a corporate spokesman / writing a column about pop culture. That's actually how you met me, of course, in my previous life.
Yep.
When I was on the McDonough show on the old 1510 in Boston. And then I started screwing around with this on the side, and eventually this kind of became my gig. So you
saw like a void. There was a void for this.
Yeah, and luckily it was right before Moneyball came out. And so as soon as Moneyball came out, everybody goes, oh, well, where's the Moneyball of X? Right, where's the Moneyball of basketball? Where's the Moneyball of football? So We were there, but it's not economics. You know, I don't sit here and do like depreciation curves or anything like that, and I think people think that the math that I use is more complicated than it really is. I took one statistics class in college.
Yeah.
It's more just sort of a natural affinity to this stuff and ability to kind of explain it in words and to apply common sense to it so I don't get, you know, wrapped up in my own numbers so much that they make no sense whatsoever.
And that's a lot of the stuff you're doing is common sense. Like, for instance, you have game charters who chart every single game of the season, mostly volunteers, right?
Yeah, I mean, mostly volunteers. I can't do it all myself. I know that's what Casey Joyner does for ESPN. Certainly, it takes me way too long to do a game to even imagine doing them all myself.
Right.
So we have a group of volunteers. We try to track them. Obviously, it's not going to be perfect. I mean, you know, trying to decipher defensive coverage and zone coverage using TV film is ridiculous. And we try to mark formations, but every so often they're showing you a picture of, like, some guy's girlfriend or Brett Favre's childhood home. We're trying to mark down how many tight ends there are, and so we kind of miss that play.
Wait, let me interrupt you for a second, because I think you mentioned this book. I can't remember, but it is crazy that they don't have the coach's camera. That should just be a show. They should just show every game with the coach's camera.
Dude, I've told people at the NFL, if they sold a DVD set of the game film for each team, they could charge an exorbitant amount of money for it. After the season was over, they wouldn't even have to do it during the season. So that no team could get any, fair disadvantage, even though they all have access to the film anyway.
But why wouldn't they do that, though?
After the season, and it would make a ton of money because there are enough hardcore fans that would pay through the nose for that for their favorite team. It would just make a ton of money.
But they're almost like they're like the CIA with this stuff. Like, they don't want people to see it, and it never made sense to me.
No, I mean it's literally Ron Jaworski or you work for the NFL. That's it. That's all that gets to see the game film. It's either an NFL matchup or you have to work for the NFL.
That makes me mad. The NFL Network, at least like at 2 a.m, they could rerun like 2 games a day from the coach's camera or something, and people could TiVo it if they want. It's like they're intentionally like unfriendly to the fans for whatever reason.
Yeah, I mean, for people who've never seen it, I cannot emphasize enough how much more you learn from seeing the coach's film with the end zone angle and then the above angle than you do with the TV.
Yeah, the best way to describe it would be like it's like watching a baseball game where you don't have the center field camera to see where each pitch goes.
Right.
It'd be like if you just watched the game from a third base camera angle and you just saw the side of the pitcher and the hitter, and that's what you saw.
Right, except that it's also watching it from the third base camera angle behind one of the big posts at Fenway. You don't actually see everything happening.
Yeah.
Because often the safeties are just completely off the screen altogether, so you have no clue what kind of deep coverage is going on because it's not even on screen.
Well, your game charters, and this I really love, they account for defensive stats like hurries and tips, which are really valuable. But the one, it seems like you use some common sense because, like, if a guy's getting double teamed, and you mentioned this, like, Rosie Colvin had more sacks, he had more hits, he had more hurries than Richard Seymour, but Seymour was double teamed all year. Colvin was on the weak side going against one guy. So if you look at Colvin's stats, he actually had somewhat of a pedestrian year as the playmaker for a good defense, right?
Well, I think he had a pretty good year as the playmaker for a good defense, but Seymour, but you're absolutely right about Seymour, and it's something, I mean, people have a hard time understanding about 3-4 defenses. They're not built for the defensive linemen to get stats, even with the kind of advanced stats we're trying to keep. They're just not built for the defensive linemen to get stats. They're built for the defensive linemen to sit there and suck on blockers all day.
But their defense was specifically built for Colvin to make big plays every game, and he made some. It was like he had 9 sacks, 18 hurries, 19 hits, whatever. But I feel like anybody could have gone in there and put up those stats with the rest of the guys around them that he had, right?
Well, I mean, I don't know if anybody could have put up the exact stats, but he certainly has the defensive line to thank for a lot of that. I mean, I say whenever I talk about the Patriots, the heart of that team is the defensive line with the 3 still young number 1 draft picks. That's the heart of the team, almost at times even more than Brady, because it's 3 players rather than 1, and the whole defense is built around those guys. Right.
Now, you had 2 teams completely defy your projection system last year, New Orleans in the regular season, and then, out of nowhere, Indy's defense coming together in the playoffs. What happened there, and what did you learn from those?
We actually had a few. Last year was, I think, our worst year projecting in the last 3. And in fact, part of that is because there was less consistency from 05 to 06 than there had been for the previous few years. It was just kind of a weird year overall.
Yeah.
New Orleans the hurricane is a huge amount of it. No one had any clue how to account for the hurricane.
And Sean Payton.
Sean Payton is also a huge part of it.
Yeah.
When you hire a new coach who's never been a head coach before, you never know how good that head coach is going to be. Now a lot of people are talking about Arizona, and they're talking about Arizona being very positive because Ken Wisenhunt. Well, we all think Ken Wisenhunt's going to be a good head coach, and I think he's going to be a good head coach, but we don't know, and we won't know until we see it for a season or two. So there was Sean Payton. There was the amazing draft that they had, where they had Reggie Bush fall into their laps. They picked a guard in the 4th round who went straight from Division II to starting in the NFL. And then they had Marcus Colston in the 7th round, one of the greatest, most random 7th round picks of all time.
Yep.
It just was an amazing, completely unpredictable year for them. I mean, we also missed out on the Jets, which nobody
with another new coach.
Another new coach.
Yep.
And we missed on the Ravens. That's the one team that we missed on that some people did see coming, but our analysis did not, partly because I don't think we really saw a hole in the secondary where DeJuan Landry ended up filling that in, which you don't usually expect from a 5th-round rookie, but they got that.
Well, I still don't feel like you missed on the Ravens because I felt that whole year that McNair was just pulling these games out of his butt. And I feel like if they played that season 20 more times, I think they go 8-8.
The amazing thing is they were number 1 in our ratings by the end of the year. Their offense really did pick it up, particularly the passing game near the end of the year, although some of that was they had an amazing number of tipped balls to Mark Clayton. It was a little absurd.
It was insane.
I have no idea what happened to them in the playoffs. Everything that had been going well for them in the second half of the season just disappeared in that playoff game.
Yeah, and I still feel like if they played Indy 10 times, I think they would have won 6 of the times. But it was just one of those games that it just didn't happen for them. They didn't catch one break, and McNair stuck the joint out. You mentioned about the DVOA as it evolves over the course of the season. At what point do you go from, okay, this is a fluke, this is 4 weeks, to being certain that something is happening?
Well, actually, early in the season, we have a version of it that we call Dave. And what it does is it combines the previous year's performance with the performance so far early in the season, with our preseason projection, in different percentages each week. And as we get later in the season, the amount of the past that we're including in that drops, and the amount that we're including the current year improves. We call it Dave because people used to say to me about how complicated the names were for our stats were, and I said, it's not like I can just call a stat Dave or something.
Right.
So then I did. So that tries to take into account and gradually figure out when teams are flukes. And obviously, it took time to figure out that the Saints were for real. And the Jets actually kind of snuck up because they weren't really breaking out early. They actually kind of did better later on. But on the other hand, it allowed us to say after the Denver Rams game in week 1, when people were all, running over each other to try to talk about how the Rams were making it to the Super Bowl again, to say, slow down, folks. This was one small win at home, 1 week. It's one game. Let's not go crazy. I mean, Dr. Z over at SI put them number 3 on his power rankings that week after one game. It was a little ridiculous.
Well, and also they had 6 field goals in that game when they could have scored touchdowns. They didn't actually even play that well. But hey, I'm glad you brought up the Rams because, they lose their center in that game in week 1 for the season. Then they lose Orlando Pace in week 8, so their offensive line just completely falls apart. So that's 1 year. It's over. How are we supposed to translate that information as we're predicting how they finish in 2007?
Well, actually, the funny thing is that they didn't really have that many injuries overall compared to what you expected an average season for an NFL offense. As far as the center getting injured, it's an advantage that it was the first game because the other guy played the entire year and thus, got used to playing on that line and they weren't constantly switching people out. Continuity is very important in the offensive line.
Right.
Pace was, of course, huge. And if you look at Bulger's stats, they just drop dramatically after Pace goes out, and he's at the age now, and so is Walter Jones and John Ogden, where these nagging injuries you got to figure they're going to be occurring every year, and you have to sort of, look at that and assume that when you're looking at a team. But overall, no one else got injured. And that includes the 2 new guys. Drew Bennett went the whole season without getting injured, and McMichael went the whole season without getting injured, and there's really no way that every single skill player on that offense can once again go the whole season without losing a game to injury.
Right.
So it's actually a little bit of a negative indicator, even though the one injury that they did have for half the year that was the really important pace injury.
And that's the frustrating thing about football, and the thing that I'm slowly learning as the years pass is like you lose one left tackle or one center, and you're like, they'll just replace him, and the team just completely falls apart. Like it's amazing. We always discount but if a running back gets hurt, everybody's like, oh my God, they don't have Larry Johnson, but nobody says like, they don't have Adam McCollum. They'll just replace him next week, and rarely do they replace them.
Yeah, I mean the center was easier to replace than Orlando Pace.
Yeah.
Was just like, for the Patriots, the cornerbacks are easier to replace than Rodney Harrison is, or for the Colts, everyone and their brother on that defense is easier to replace than Bob Sanders.
Yeah.
Or Dwight Freeney would be, except Freeney's never been hurt. It's really important. It is 11 guys working together, and the fact is, for all the numbers that we try to do, we always have to consider the scheme and who are your teammates. And, we straight out say when we split our DVOA numbers and our other numbers down for specific players, particularly on offense, they don't really represent how good that player is.
Yep.
They represent how good that player is in that scheme, with that coach, with those teammates. We're nowhere near the point where we could actually try to separate Larry Johnson from the Kansas City line and Herm Edwards' play-calling style and whatever. So I like to think that we have a little bit of humility when it comes to realizing that our stats are never going to tell the whole story. But the way I figure is everybody uses both stats and scouting when they look at the game, from people in NFL front offices to the dude on the stool at the bar watching, Sunday Ticket with a beer. And all we're trying to do is make the stats part of that better, not get rid of the scouting part of that.
Yeah, and I appreciate that with you guys, because there are some other people, and we won't mention names, who just adamantly, these are the stats, this is what it says, you can't come up with any other interpretation other than this. And you guys are looking to accentuate what's happening with your statistics.
Yeah, I'm glad that you got that, because it's hard to explain that sometimes. Because when the baseball guys started out, this was a big problem for them. And Bill James and back in the day, and the guy who wrote the Diamond Appraised or whatever that book was about Tom House, and those guys really did think their numbers were going to change the world. The baseball guys have actually come a little bit more towards where we're coming from now that, Baseball Prospectus has Kevin Goldstein doing minor league scouting, and they're being a little more holistic now than their forefathers were, 25 years ago. But I looked at that when I started doing this, and I said, I don't want anybody to think that I am of the opinion that I could walk into a front office and take over any team in the NFL, not the Patriots, but any bad team in the NFL, like the Lions or something, and go ahead and win a Super Bowl championship with them. Actually, we might be able to with the Lions, but no other team.
Well, some of your stats still drive me crazy. And this is one of the reasons I wanted to have you on. Like, you have a chapter breaking down the top 20 seasons ever by a running back. Future double murderer O.J. Simpson rushes for 2,003 yards in a 14-game season. He does it with no passing game. He does it in cold weather. He does it against basically 11 guys in a box. And you rank this as the 11th greatest season ever by a running back. Please explain.
Well, we did rank his season 2 years later as the number one season ever by a running back.
Yeah, the 1975 season.
Right.
But I'm not going to be telling my grandkids about the 1975 season, but 2,003 yards in a 14-game season, come on. That's got to be the greatest season ever.
Well, I don't think being 11th is anything to feel bad about.
He rushed for 2,003 yards.
Right, with no passing game, which is absolutely positively true. And what we tried to do with this research project is I tried to account for all of that.
Right.
Because the stats for the NFL, the standard stats, are missing a ton of the things that we have in our play-by-play breakdown. But our play-by-play breakdown only goes back to 96. We're in the middle of doing 95 right now, but we have to actually scan it all into a computer, and I have an army of drones who are out there, typing it. So I tried to adjust for those things by using what stats I had. Team first down split between run and pass, schedule adjustments, looking at what the other running backs on the team did compared to the top guy. I threw all kinds of stuff in there, trying to get a list that would bring us the best seasons. And then there was the adjustment for sort of how the workload for running backs has changed and how the usage has changed. Because, back in the day, they did much more to split carries among running backs than they do now. For all that people are talking about the return of the running back by committee, Earl Campbell in 1980 set a new NFL record with 65% of his team's carries And last year there were 3 guys over 80%.
Jesus.
So, things have changed. And when this list was done, and it threw out Larry Zonka as the number 10 season, I felt very good about it because any kind of just normal statistical normalization that only considered how many yards per carry all the running backs got back in 71 compared to now would have never put that season that high because it wouldn't have accounted for the fact that Zonka's numbers were lower that year because he had to share with 2 other guys who were also good. So, when I put all of this in, Simpson ended up 11th. And there certainly is an argument that I should have done more with just how horrifically awful the quarterback was for the Bills that season, and it would have ended up with him higher. I say this list isn't perfect, but it's pretty good. The season that people are angry at me about, the 2 seasons that people are angry at me about, are Eric Dickerson's all-time record is 84th or something. And Jamal Lewis's 2003 season, which is the second highest total, is 229th. Those are the seasons people are angry with me about.
Yeah.
But the Dickerson one is because the guy was fumble-rific.
Yep.
And that does matter, the fact that he had more fumbles in that season than almost any other running back in any season in history.
And was in 16 games versus 14 for OJ.
Right, definitely. And the other is Jamal Lewis in 03 is one where he really had 2 or 3 amazing games, and particularly had a few really amazing long highlight runs.
Yep.
But he was not consistent that year. They did not get a lot of rushing first downs. Jamal Lewis had a problem where he would get a lot of 0 and 1 yard gains, and that's just not as good as a guy who gets consistent gains every single time he carries the ball, like Emmitt Smith used to do, or like LaDainian Tomlinson does now. And he had 387 carries to get that 2066. So if he had the same number of carries as the other running backs in the league that year, he wouldn't have gotten 2,000 yards.
I think you need to keep tinkering with it until the juice from 73 is number 1. Just keep throwing in factors. Also,
I like this better than when it came out with every top season was either from the last 7 years or a Cleveland Browns guy from the 60s.
I also want you to do the bottom 20 because I want to see where Marion Butts' one famous season ranks.
Well, actually, I have that list. I could throw it up on my site.
I want to see that. I want to see where Marion Butts ranks exactly.
I will throw it up on Football Outsiders. I did put the lowest season in the book, which is Melvin Carver for the 1983 Tampa Bay Bucks when he got 3 yards per game with 6 fumbles and 114 carries against an easy schedule.
Jeez. Well, another chapter you guys did was you tried to adjust the receiving yardage for the guys in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that, especially the 70s where people just didn't pass as much. And it was stunning. Cliff Branch. Who knew? Who knew Cliff Branch was one of the 15 greatest receivers of the last 30 years?
Yeah, well, he was all about that era, that 70s era where everything was so run-focused. And
yeah.
One of the things about looking at historical football stats, it's much harder than historical baseball stats. The strategies of the game and the context of the stats has changed much more often. The eras of football are smaller. And part of the problem is that the 70s were very unique because of the high running, low passing. Actually, the 60s and 50s had more passing than the 70s did. But people now, because that was the years that the baby boomers were growing up and today's commentators were in the game and Madden was coaching in the game and so forth, they think of that as the golden era of football and that's always the way football statistics were until Bill Walsh came around, and that's actually not true. That is the weird era. The 70s is the weird era, not the normal era where the passing era of today is weird.
Well, I feel vindicated because Cliff Branch always scared the living hell out of me, so I'm glad that he was represented. Here are my top 6 favorite things in your book. I'm just going to say them. You explain them. Let's rip through these fast because we got a couple other things to cover. For coaching, I love the aggressiveness index.
Got to give props to Jim Armstrong, who only writes for the book, doesn't have time to write for the site during the season, but that's his baby.
The best thing is, Belichick obviously rates very high, but Norv Turner rates low, which I love because my buddy who played blackjack with him that time, and Norv Turner kept staying on 16. So needless to say, he rated low in the aggressiveness index. I love
at the blackjack table, so at 4th down, I guess.
For defense, I like defeats. I thought that was a good one. Explain that.
Another one, by the way, that I have to give props to someone else. Defeats was an idea of Roland Beach's back when Roland Beach was doing 2minutewarning.com instead of 82games.com for basketball.
Okay.
And Roland and I have become friends, and we've sort of borrowed the basic ideas of his defensive stats.
Well, explain what it is.
Defeats are any defensive play, and by play, it's anything that gets mentioned in the play-by-play. Okay, pass defense, interception, fumble, recovery or force, tackle, etc. That either causes a loss of yardage, a turnover, or stops the offense from converting on third or fourth down.
I love that one. What did you determine about field goal accuracy from year to year?
It is almost entirely unpredictable.
I thought that was crazy.
It is. Isn't it crazy?
Yeah.
It's totally crazy. When I first ran those numbers, I was blown away, and we kept looking for ways to prove this was not correct. And I went back into the past and ran all kinds of things, trying to tie guys' career percentages to it, and looking at career percentages below 40, above 40. And I found two things. The first is it was slightly predictable before the introduction of the K-ball in 1999. And the second is there's a slight correlation between career field goal percentage below 40 yards and next year's field goal percentage below 40 yards. But above 40 yards, not only is your field goal percentage entirely inconsistent from year to year, but the number of attempts is entirely inconsistent from year to year, which totally blows away one of the ideas of fantasy football, which is like always draft Jason Elam because you know he'll get more 50-yard attempts in Denver.
Right.
It turns out there's no correlation from year to year, even in how many long attempts guys get. It's wild, and it doesn't.
So it's a crapshoot.
It doesn't mean that there's no such thing as field goal accuracy. It just means that the method that we use to measure it is useless.
Crapshoot.
It's total crapshoot.
Quickly, what did you find out about the QB stats in the shotgun?
Oh, shotgun is better than standard under center for almost every single QB in the league, every year, in every situation. We tried all kinds of downs and distances, and we tried running. We tried taking out scrambles to take out the Michael Vick effect. It doesn't matter. Shotgun always came out better.
It's funny because every time I play video games, I always use the shotgun just because I'm more comfortable with it. So I was glad your stats vindicated me on that.
Well, Lord knows in the NCAA they've learned this, man, because all those shotgun option offenses,
right.
So they keep putting guys in shotgun.
All right, we covered the 2-point conversion rates, which I just thought was riveting. That it's basically when you remove all the other stuff, it's about 71%. Wasn't that it?
It's been going up each year as the number of attempts of 2-point conversions have been going down each year. So it's actually something coaches should start thinking about doing more.
And then finally, the curse of 370, which I talked about in the Matt Berry podcast. But basically, if your running back carries more than 370 times in a season, he's in trouble.
Yeah, and it's not a hard and fast rule, and it hasn't applied to every single person throughout history. Eric Dickerson is the big exception, but James Wilder from Tampa Bay was fine after he had a huge carry year, and LaDainian Tomlinson had a year with 372 that he was good the next year, and then the year after that was 04 when he had the nagging groin injuries.
Yeah.
But in general, you overwork your running back, and you are in huge trouble. And we also did in last year's book that it's 390 if you include the playoffs, and that ropes in seasons like Corey Dillon, and it ropes in Amon Green, and it ropes in Jamal Lewis the year before he tore his ACL. And, of course, Larry Johnson is so absurdly, ridiculously in the crosshairs on this that it almost makes sense for Kansas City to not pay him.
Just let him take the year off.
Well, our projection for him in the book has him under 4 yards per carry. When you throw down the likely slowdown, we're not even talking about the injury possibility. When you throw down the likely slowdown with losing Will Shields off his offensive line, I mean, he's just not going to be the same guy.
Yeah, I really like the curse of 370. And it's funny, I hadn't read that you had written about this last year. And in my column, I just randomly one of those weeks noticed that Larry Johnson was over or close to 400 carries. And I was like, oh, my God, this is incredible. And then I think he had like 25 carries the last week, but it's not good. And you said that Dickerson, that he didn't have effects, but we didn't see the effects until he tried to be a sideline reporter. That's when it manifested itself about 15 years later. All right, I have some stats that I wanted you to create. I have 4 stats. So let me know what you think of these, all right?
Alrighty.
Number 1, the Adrian Wilson. He's the Arizona safety. Last year he had 5 sacks, 4 interceptions, 4 forced fumbles, 9 hurries, and 2 99-yard TDs. And you guys love him. So let's say you make sacks, interceptions, and fumbles worth 2. You make hurries worth 1. You make TDs worth 3. And you make 50-plus TDs worth 5. And you create the Adrian Wilson Index. What do you think?
It's an interesting kind of play stat for how much a guy did on the field, but first of all, I don't know if that's the actual importance of those things in the grand scheme of things.
Well, I made it up. I'm not saying it.
Right, and the other is, one thing we've learned is touchdown returns of interceptions and fumbles are almost entirely random. They're based on, where was the ball fumbled or intercepted and down the field, like what was the location where it was picked up and what happened to be the location of the offensive guys when you pick up the ball or when you intercept the pass, and it's actually, there's really not a lot of the player's actual speed and talent connected.
Yeah, but if you go for more than 50 yards, you have to have a little bit of talent. You either have to have speed or you have to have some juking ability or something.
Oh, yeah, no doubt. And you have to have the knowledge to not try to make a stupid lateral like Ed Reed tries to do all the time. But still, it's mostly kind of, a lot of guys who have plenty of speed and agility don't get those touchdowns just because they're not standing in the right place when they happen to intercept the pass. But,
so you're down on the Adrian Wilson index. I'm over.
Well, I'm not down on anything that shows how awesome Adrian Wilson is because we do think that he's very awesome.
I think you need to at least look at this. All right, number 2. I didn't see this. Maybe you do this and I just didn't notice it. But what about pass interference yardage created? Like if Torrey Holt causes 12 pass interferences for 340 yards, shouldn't this factor into his stats?
It is on our to-do list to add to the individual stats next time the individual stats get a really big overall redo, which is probably coming next spring. Bill Barnwell did actually a research project on this that ended up on a blog we were doing last year as part of our deal with Fox, and that article is somewhere on our site still. He found that was only one receiver who year after year that the pass interference yardage actually correlated and was not random, and it was Donald Driver.
Wow. Interesting.
So we don't know how much the receiver actually has to do with that, and I don't know how much the quarterback has to do with that, and we would need to research that. I mean, it's logically it makes total sense, but there was a year like 3 years ago where the number one guy in pass interference yardage as a receiver was Todd Pinkston, and it's not really like cornerbacks were scared of Todd Pinkston. So I do think there would need to be some study as to whether that was actually important or not. But obviously, it's a good idea. Pass interference is one of the most important penalties.
You know why I like that one? It's a potentially a good acronym. PIC. P-I-Y-C. PIC. All right,
gotta work on the acronyms, dude. Definitely.
You need so much. I'd like to be your acronym specialist if you'd hire one. I'd love to help you out. Third, the Terrell Owens. Basically, any drop on third down that kills a drive. He would have led the league last year.
The broken hand was part of that. Part of the problem with that is we don't get the drop data till weeks later because the game charting project takes a long time to turn around.
Gotcha.
With a group of volunteers, it's not like we're getting games charted 2 days later. I could go back and find out who led the league in that last year. But
I have a guess. I think it was Terrell Owens.
Does it include how much a jerk you are, so it includes Brandon Lloyd also, or is it just drops on third down?
No, I want just straight killer drops on third down. And you know who might have led the league 2 years ago was Deion Branch. No, Deion Branch 2 years ago for the Pats. Secretly had about 8 killer drops for them.
Darrell Jackson and Cord Robinson had those years in Seattle where they just dropped everything. And then there was in 2005, the drops got much better, and then last year they got worse again. Yeah.
All right, here's the last one. I had to throw myself on one of these. The Bill Simmons WOW Index. I want my own stat.
All right.
You have your game charters. As they're charting the plays, they write down every play that made them say, wow, as it was happening. Like, for instance, remember the Anquan Bolden play when he caught that ball over the middle and he broke like 7 tackles and he dragged 2 guys in the end zone?
Yeah.
It was either last year or 2 years ago. That was a wow play. Or like if Bob Sanders comes flying in, 4th and goal on the 1, he jumps over the offensive line and stonewalls the guy in midair. That's a wow play. So just keep track of those and see who has the most wow plays.
We actually have an extra comment space in the charting, and people write often when the play was just like mind-blowingly awesome, unless they're fans of the team that had that play against them, and then you see all kinds of swearing, and I can't believe he just did that to us. So it actually, wouldn't be that hard to do, but it would. There's definitely when you watch every game and you watch it in slow motion, the kind of stuff we do with game charting, you see some stuff where you realize it more than when it's just live. You're like, wow, this guy's really getting it going,
I think it's worth it to experiment with it.
All right.
All right, we need to have one argument, so here it is. You defended Peyton Manning a couple times in your book. And not only that, but you excoriated anyone who wrote or said that Manning choked in big playoff games. Now, I'm one of those people. First of all, you're a Pats fan, so how dare you? Second of all, here's what you wrote. You wrote, year after year, the media criticized Manning for his poor play, and year after year it was ridiculous. Manning played well in recent postseasons, with the glaring exception of the 2003 AFC Championship game. How can you say that? You can't think that, right?
Well, first of all, I will note that I did not write the Peyton Manning player comment. That was Mike Tanier.
That was in your Indianapolis thing. You wrote it.
I wrote the Indianapolis chapter, but...
that's where I got it from.
But that's from the chapter itself, because the player comment that talks about how there's no such thing as choking, Mike wrote that.
No, this is from your Indianapolis scouting report.
Right. The fact is, look, if you think of 04, that 04, I'm not going back to like when they got shut out by the Jets in 2000.
Why?
Only been in the league
no, go back to 99 when they were favored by 7 in Tennessee, and he didn't throw a touchdown and had a terrible game, and they lost.
The last 2 or 3 years, they had those blowouts of Denver.
Yeah.
The 04 game, I thought, was really remarkable. He was very good in that game in the snow, but...
when they scored 3 points.
The receivers fumbled away the ball 2 or 3 times. One of them was a Teddy Bruschi, like just went right in there and just stripped it. And Edgerrin James was awful. And their defense was awful. And so that's not Peyton's fault. A lot of my feeling about the Colts' losses of the past not being Peyton's fault is actually respect for the Patriots' defense. Because if it all comes down to Brady and Manning all the time, then, then I think that minimizes the importance of how good the Patriots' defense and head coach and schemes are, particularly to, say, rip the ball away from a receiver after Peyton's made a good pass, which is what Teddy Bruschi did.
Right.
So, listen, 03 was horrible. He was horrible in that game.
Well, he was horrible in the Jets game in 02. And they also lost to Miami in 2000. And he lost to Tennessee in 99.
Right, you can go back into college and stuff, but the fact is he wasn't bad against Pittsburgh, and he wasn't bad against the Patriots in 04, and he had those blowouts, those Denver games that were just absurdly ridiculous. So in recent times, it was just that one game where he could not stop throwing the ball to Ty Law. But otherwise, it really was other parts of that team that failed around him, not him himself.
But you have to accept the fact that people can have the opinion that since, until the 06 season, he was, I think, 3-6 in the playoffs and had really only had 2 great games, or 3 great games, I'm sorry.
But those are great games. He didn't choke every single time, and he had good games. He had good games, it wasn't terrible game after terrible game after terrible game. I do think you can say a guy chokes in one single game. I mean, I'll say it about McNair last year, because that was awful against the Colts when the Ravens just spit the bit.
Yeah.
But, the fact is, what Tanier writes in the player comment is accurate, which is guys like this who get to the NFL and become superstars have gone through so many games with pressure on them where they have performed, that to pick out just the ones where they haven't, and I know obviously there's the whole Tennessee-Florida business, et cetera, and say he's a choker, period, he'll never be able to get it done, seems to be really overstating the deal. And especially when you look at the last couple of years of Colts teams where they were always let down by the defense or by Edge's inability to get yardage or by receivers dropping the ball or losing, fumbles to Teddy Bruschi.
My whole thing with Manning was that I felt like people weren't incorporating his playoff performances enough into their evaluations of him because he was unstoppable in the regular season. He was great in these playoff games like against Denver when they were 10-point favorites, which you have to factor into that, like they were expected to win. But when in the games where his team was not doing that well around him and they needed him to step up and really take over the game, he just didn't do it. And really the Pats game last year when they were down 18 points was the first time in a big playoff game that I felt like he just put the team on his back and won it for them.
Well, like I said, I do feel like in 04 he was making the plays he had to make, and the guys around him weren't. But, I understand, and there's also the issue of, like I said about our numbers, that numbers don't tell you the whole story all the time.
Yep.
And you have to consider the surroundings. And the fact that offense is built to get numbers in a way that the Patriots offense is not. built to get numbers, that the Chargers offense is not built around getting Phillip Rivers numbers or Drew Brees before him, because of the fact that they've got a good defense and that LaDainian Tomlinson is awesome and so forth. So our official answer to the question of who was better, Peyton Manning and Tom Brady, was always they're equal, because we didn't want to have to deal with the emotions of the argument, because people would lose their minds. And the fact that Peyton Manning is better in our numbers than Tom Brady is not absolute positive proof that he's a better quarterback. Because
all right, let me ask you this.
Including the context.
Let me ask you this.
Yes.
Before the 2006 season, your life depends on it. Brady and Manning have equal teams. Basically, the game is going to come down to who comes through, Brady or Manning. Who would you have taken?
I would have taken Brady, but if you were to poll my staff, I guarantee you it would end up half and half. I'd take Brady because I'm a Patriots fan, man. He's still my boy.
Yeah, although he did stink in the 2005 Broncos game, or the 2005 playoffs.
The Broncos just have a thing, man. We call it the rock, paper, scissors theory, and it kind of got broken last year, but it lasted for a long time. Colts beat Broncos, Broncos beat Patriots, Patriots beat Colts, rock, paper, scissors. Lasted for a long time, kind of broken last year.
Yeah, and I still feel like this Manning thing is kind of funny, because if Troy Brown cuts the right way on 3rd and 4 at the end of that playoff game last year, the Colts lose, and everybody remembers that the Colts went 3 and out when their season was on the line, and then Peyton Manning has to deal with 9 more months of you're a choker, you're never going to win a big one.
Well, I'll give you a bigger one. Dallas Clark's original, the injury that he had to his knee was thought to be a torn ACL, which he would have been out for the season.
Yep.
It ended up that someone misread the X-ray or MRI or whatever it was, and it was an MCL, and he was able to return. If, before they realized their mistake, they had placed him on IR and put him out for the season, the Patriots are Super Bowl champions. Because the Colts won because the Patriots did not have linebackers that could pass cover up the middle, because the linebackers are getting older, and for some reason they thought, hey, let's throw in a guy who hasn't played all year and was undrafted and let him basically determine our entire season. And it turns out Eric Alexander is not very good. But without Dallas Clark, the Patriots win that game, and they beat the Bears, and they have 4-6. And yet Peyton Manning is no different than he is today.
Well, and then you throw in the other part is Harrison getting hurt in the meaningless Week 17 game.
Which is also a big one. And it was funny to hear him talk about it on the radio, because the guy who did it isn't even on the Titans anymore. Yeah.
It was terrible. All right. Well, we're never going to resolve this, but I hate the fact that you're a Pats fan and you're defending Manning. Like, I feel like you need to go into Foxborough and really be roughed up by a couple of the Pats fans.
As I tell you, it is ultimate respect for the Patriots defense, and I am always afraid that if I disrespect Rodney Harrison, he will come to my house and beat up my family.
All right.
He's very adamant about this.
Okay, last question. Based on your data, give me your 2007 sleeper to win at least 10 games. Has to be a team that won 6 games or less last year.
I would say 2. The first is Washington, because they had the worst third down pass defense that we've measured in our 11 years of breaking down play-by-play. And one of the things we've found out going backwards, and this is one of the ways we were able to predict the 2004 San Diego Chargers breakout, is that teams that are good on first and second down but bad on third tend to improve the following year. And when you add to that the fact that the Redskins were already really good on third down defense before last year, there's a real rebound opportunity there. I mean, their biggest problem is they have no depth whatsoever. And so as soon as the injuries start, and they already have with Chris Samuels, and of course Portis can't stay healthy anymore, but as soon as the injuries start, then they're in huge trouble because there's no depth, and they desperately need Sean Springs to stay healthy.
But with the depth thing, you could say the same thing about the Indianapolis Colts.
Right. And I do actually, in the Washington chapter of the book, I point out that, the Colts and Redskins are very similar. Basically, the difference is Peyton Manning, Marvin Harrison, and luck, because otherwise the rosters are quite similar. And obviously, Peyton Manning and Marvin Harrison is a huge difference, but if you were to ask people what the difference was between Washington and Indianapolis, they would probably think it was a lot more than just 2 players.
And your other one, I think you said, was Tampa. And you're for whatever reason, your system always loves Tampa.
Yeah, it always loves Tampa a little too much, and it always dislikes St. Louis a little too much. Well, the St. Louis offense, I don't disagree with what it ever says about the St. Louis defense, which is awful. But, I just assume that at some point there will be a variable that we will come up with that will help fix this. We just haven't thought of it yet.
Right.
And that's one of the reasons why we don't take our own projections as the gospel truth, because we assume there's hundreds of possible variables that we just haven't thought of yet.
you know how I love announcing in my column. Every year I love announcing my sleeper. And I've actually been pretty good with accuracy with the sleepers every year. I haven't come up with one yet, but I've narrowed it down to 4 teams. Washington is actually one of the teams because I agree with you. Like, I just think they have a lot of talent, and last year was a fluky year. They had some bad chemistry, whatever. I don't like Tampa as much. I was looking at the Cardinals for a long time, but they're the Cardinals, and you just figure something terrible is going to happen. But the other 2 teams, I think Green Bay is interesting because of their defense. Like, they have a lot of good guys in that defense.
Except Green Bay does not qualify because I believe they were like 7-9 or 8-8 last year. They were 8-8
Oh my God, you're right. I forgot that.
We actually have Green Bay projected to win that division.
Yeah, I like them in that division, and the Bears, I think, are just going to have a variety of problems.
If you had said to me 8-8 or worse, the answer would have been Green Bay, no question about it. Green Bay and Jacksonville.
All right, I cheated then. All right, well, here's the other one I like that you didn't have. I like the Raiders. I don't know why. I just think their defense was really good last year, and you figure, like, you upgrade from Art Shell to really any competent human being, and that's worth 5 games.
Even if the competent human being has mono.
It doesn't matter. And it's like, all right, let's say they get anything out of Culpepper. Let's say they could just score like 17 points a game. With that defense, I don't think the Chargers are going to be as good. I think the Chiefs are going to be bad. They're going against a lot of last place teams. There isn't really an AFC sleeper yet. I'm looking closely at the Raiders.
I will buy that as a possibility, definitely, because I'm with you on the defense. And Culpepper is, who knows? I mean, the fact is that guy from 2004, if that guy's the quarterback of the Raiders, they're definitely a better team. But there's still the problem where that offensive line is horrible, and offensive line is more important than people realize to how good teams are. Look at what happened with the Seahawks last year.
Right.
And that offensive line is still horrible, and so that's what makes me really hesitant to imagine any kind of huge breakout for them.
Listen to their first 4 weeks. Home against Detroit, at Denver, possible upset, Cleveland at home, and then at Miami. Could be 4-0. Who knows? Lane Kiffin.
Yeah, I know, but man, Robert Gallery.
All right, we gotta wrap this up. I think this was the longest podcast ever, so congratulations on that. You can check out Aaron Schatz at footballoutsiders.com, and you can read his book, Pro Football Prospectus. You should definitely get it. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks again for having me, man.
All right, take care.
5% off. Whoa.
Thank you for downloading the BS Report with Bill Simmons.
Too much fun.
Check out more podcasts at the iTunes Music Store or at Pod Center at ESPNradio.com.
Peace out.